Good morning. This is Allison Pena with Worldwide ERC. Thanks to everyone for connecting, and welcome to today's webinar, The Future of Work. It's Here Today, sponsored by Move Guides. Before we begin, please take a moment to review Worldwide ERC's webinar disclaimer. And now I would like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the WebEx session today, please dial 866-779-3239 from the U.S. Email questions may be sent to support@webex.com. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online. To submit your questions, please use the Q&A tab located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Simply click on the tab and type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen, and then click the Send button. Please note that all written questions selected during this webinar will be answered publicly. We do expect a high volume of questions and will attempt to answer as many as possible. Lastly, a link to this handout will be included in in an email scheduled to go out later this afternoon. Please be on the lookout for it. It will come from messenger@webex.com. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 CRP and 1 GMS credit. If you hold your CRP designation and would like to receive credit for this webinar, you must utilize the online credits management portal, which you can link to after logging into My Account on the Worldwide ERC website. The ID for today's webinar is 15332. If you are a GMS seeking CE credit for this webinar, you must include the name and date of it on your GMS renewal application at the time that you apply for recertification. The renewal application is available online. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Jennifer Farris, co-founder and CEO of Squadley by FarsideHR. Jennifer Farris is a seasoned HR executive and consultant with over 10 years' experience in HR management. She is also the co-founder and CEO of Squadley, a workforce success platform which brings together real-time data that drives alignment, performance, and engagement to help #MakeManagersAwesome. Through her career, Jennifer has held HR leadership positions at Kabam, Practice Fusion, Ampush, and Flexport. I am delighted to welcome Jennifer. I will now turn the program over to her.
Great. Thank you so much. Hope everyone can hear me okay. I really appreciate the very kind intro, and I'm very excited to be here today. And thank you to everyone on the line who's spending time with us this morning. Today we will be talking about the future of work. And what do we mean by the future of work? This is a very generic statement. I'm sure we could come up with 100 different definitions. But today, I'm really going to focus on what does the future of the workforce look like, and maybe more importantly, how will we manage it? So with that, let's just jump right in. The workforce is melting. The workforce is melting, and the flow of talent is accelerating at a rapid rate. Now, what do I mean by this? This kind of sounds scary. What I really mean is the traditional employment relationship is breaking. Currently, in the U.S., we have 57 million freelancers in the United States right now. And in less than a decade, we're going to go up by another 30 million. And at that point, it will represent the majority of the U.S. workforce. And it's not just the U.S. Outside the U.S., we've had a 14% increase in the rate of freelancers in the United Kingdom. And as of 2013, the EU saw a 45% increase in the number of freelancers. And at that point, that represented the majority of their labor market. So the question is, why is it growing so fast? Well, millennials are definitely helping lead this shift. Whether it's for supplemental income or a desire to have an impact or more autonomy in their work, they are definitely a large contingent of this market. And they're able to be successful because 71% are getting increased work from online resources, and many of us know them well. You know, Upwork is a wonderful resource, many of which these statistics come from. And the statistic that's particularly interesting to me, and I think really the game changer in how we're all going to experience working with freelancers in the gig economy, is this 55%. 55% of freelancers learned a new skill in the last 6 months, compared to 30% in the traditional workforce. Now, why is that important? I'm an HR professional by trade. I still work with many companies on a consulting basis, and day in and day out, one of the things I hear the most is, I want to learn and grow. I want to get more training. I'd like to go and take a class. It is a constant ask amongst employees in a traditional market, but companies have their own priorities and oftentimes limited resources. And so the ability for companies to invest in training sometimes isn't at the rate that an individual could invest in themselves. And so, but this is particularly important because as we talk about the next wave of innovation, whatever that might be, who are the ones that are going to be ready for it? It may not be the people that you chose to hire as employees at your organization. At that point, you may have to reach out, to someone as a freelancer within the gig economy, contingent workforce, however you want to call it, to help supplement the skills of your organization if you need something in a timely fashion. It might take too long and take too many resources to train the people you already have. So this 55%, I think, is going to actually be the driver of the increased rate in the number of freelancers that we see. And really, beyond that, there's just also been a shift in what's really valued amongst, employees, amongst, the workforce of America and the world. Work-life balance is becoming more and more important. And I think, maybe my parents' generation, this was something that was more prevalent. But certainly over the last 20 years, there's been a strong push to drive your own career. And I think, we've seen many articles, certainly many books, that people are starting to live to work. And this is definitely starting to take a shift back. I mentioned new skills and training. This is definitely a big driver that is driving the numbers up in the freelance world. But then think about it. The millennials, if they really are the ones, driving the numbers up here, why is that? Many of them in the traditional workforce are looking to grow their career quickly, are looking to be a manager within a few years. And what's the fastest way to do that? The fastest way to do that is to become your own boss. You have more autonomy over your work, and you're making an impact. And then perhaps one of the things that's just an interesting thing to note, this premise of stability and benefits is just not keeping talent the way it once was. I think that freelancing was once taboo almost because of this concept. The concept that, hey, you don't know when you're going to get your next paycheck or you're not getting benefits. But that's not what's driving people to stay anymore. In fact, 70% of freelancers say they would prefer to get paid more and then go procure their own benefits. And the funny thing is, it's not just freelancers that are moving around. Churn is increasing at a rapid rate. And I know within the Bay Area and the tech community, we're feeling it particularly hard. This is a list of some of the most notable technology companies that all of us are aware of. And the average tenure, what considered good, is somewhere around 2 years. 2 years. If you consider that it takes 3 to 6 months to onboard everyone, and then potentially the last 3 months of anyone's time at a company is likely starting to disengage, you're maybe getting 18 months of quality time out of the people that you're hiring. And it's a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to actually go through to find, hire, and train all of these individuals. And the reality is, why should they stay? Why should they stay when there is so much competition and so much opportunity? In the US right now, we're hovering just at about 4% unemployment. The EU is at just over 7.5%, and in the UK at 4.2%. And all of these are trending down year over year. And then, of course, in the Bay Area, in the technology community, it is pretty much statistically zero unemployment. We're hovering at just about 3.7%. So ultimately, retention and recruiting are more and more difficult. You're not going to be able to procure the talent you need perhaps as quickly or as easily as you once were. So what will you ultimately do to get the work done? You're going to need to turn to tech-enabled marketplaces. You're going to need to go out and find ways to augment your organization through sources that might be less permanent. Swarm Sales is an organization that I actually work with at my company. Now, this is a group of professional salespeople. It's a marketplace for professional salespeople who have their own networks, their own portfolios, and basically I can get connected to them to help sell my product, and they sell it into their own contacts. I pay when there is a successful arrangement, and I never have to go through the traditional recruiting process and traditional training process of hiring my own sales force. It's pretty much on demand when I need it. And there's plenty of these types of organizations. We all know Upwork. As I mentioned, many of these statistics come from some of their own white papers. Chief Outsiders is one organization for marketing. And then I just wanted to call out the Freelancers Union. Now, this is a marketplace, but it is a place of community for freelancers. It is ways for them to advocate and get help with benefits, with questions. Oftentimes, it's been said that, hey, eventually you'll want to join a company because you'll want that connection to other people, that community, that culture. Well, freelancers are creating that for themselves. Freelancers.com has 27 million freelancers on it alone. So ultimately, this is how companies will need to help solve for some of their talent gaps. And so the next question that really we need to ask ourselves is, how does this impact HR? And as an HR professional, this is something I think about often. And I can tell you that I'm worried. I'm worried because change can be very inconvenient. I know that in the companies that I work with, anytime we have to go through change management, it's a lot of time, a lot of hand-holding, and resources and communication that goes into making these changes. Engagement and retention as topics we're holding on to occupies our professional dialogue, and we haven't started really shifting to the new world. And what is that new world? What does that really look like? Well, I'd ask you to go back in your mind to your 7th grade science class and think about the difference between what a solid, liquid, and gas is. Now that solid there, if you use your imagination, doesn't look or looks a little bit like those traditional org charts that we all know. You know, it's very structured. You can tell where everything fits. You can tell the sides versus the top. But you add a little bit of change, a little bit of heat, and all of a sudden those molecules start to move around. It doesn't become quite as tangible as it once was. It's still generally bonded, but this is really the marriage of the contingent and traditional workforces. This is where I think we're really living right now and not even really yet prepared for. And the crazy thing is, there's already organizations that are hitting this gas stage. So you add a little more change, and we're not far from holacracy and gig marketplaces truly dominating the workforce. I already know organizations that are working within this construct. Many of you probably do. This isn't that far off, and we're not even quite ready for the liquid stage. So what will HR do if only 30% of the core workforce is a solid and 70% is a fluid? You can be that penguin up at the top of the iceberg there screaming, "Our iceberg is melting," and clearly being a little bit too late in the game. Or you could be those penguins up in front. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, excited and looking forward to the next stage. Yes, it might be a little scary, but it also could mean opportunity. Because we've seen what happens when industries kind of stick their feet in the ground and are unwilling to change and unwilling to evolve to stay relevant. The most common or notable example is the taxi industry. Organizations like Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing apps have really disrupted this industry. And the taxi industry had their opportunity to evolve, and they kind of chose not to. Similarly, the hotel industry getting disrupted by Airbnb or marketplaces overall. So what has been learned by these disruptions can help us inform how we need to manage our own futures. And right now, I think our industry, the HR industry, has a bit of a myopic obsession. I'm worried that we are continually optimizing for a past that doesn't exist that much now, much less exist in the future. For example, we talk a lot about getting rid of the traditional performance review, and I've been a part of all those conversations. You know, I've worked to try to worked on technology to try to help with that. But ultimately, we're still having a very traditional conversation. HR is still ultimately owning the performance review process. And my argument is, how can HR manage all of the inflow and outflow of talent every month, every week, or every day when you consider a marketplace or gig economy future? They can't necessarily manage every single person coming in and out all the time. So and my answer is that HR isn't going to do that. That can't be the job. So what ultimately needs to change? And I proposed 5 key shifts. And my organization has a white paper on this if anybody is interested. But the 5 key shifts are: planning and performance is always on. We need to think about engagement, but with an emphasis on achievement. Manager is the performance driver. Accessibility to tools and talent. And data and insights as key to management. So to start, continuous performance. Again, this is a conversation we've all had, but I do want to talk about how this works within a gig economy construct. So we need to ensure first that the first 4 areas are in place: agile planning, alignment, coaching, and feedback. And unfortunately, even with a lot of the organizations I work with, those top 2 boxes still elude a lot of companies. Agile planning and alignment are very challenging for many organizations. I think everybody knows it's important on some level, but coaching and feedback gets a lot more attention, I think, than the planning and alignment pieces. And I think that if those top 2 boxes aren't really focused on, bringing people in and out of a company at a very rapid rate becomes that much more difficult, because you need people to get on board very quickly. You need them to align to their work very quickly. However, as part of that traditional performance review conversation and the shift away from that, we've talked a lot about getting rid of performance ratings. And generally speaking, I'm on board. Definitely you want to focus more and more on the coaching elements and the performance acceleration elements. However, when you get into your Uber, do you have a performance acceleration or coaching conversation with your driver before you get out? No, you don't. You give them a rating on the app. And so I do think ratings have their place. The quickest way for us to evaluate and measure talent is through scoring. It does not mean we eliminate coaching and feedback, but if we are seeing more and more inflow and outflow of talent, how will we know if we want to hire that person again for another project? We need to be able to collect this feedback on a regular basis. And similarly, many of us have gone through annual engagement surveys or semi-annual engagement surveys, and it has some of the same challenges to the performance review construct. If people are so fluid coming in and out of organizations, the first real question is, do you need those traditional surveys? My argument would be we need to start thinking about engagement connected to achievement. We need to reframe the conversation. Ultimately, people are motivated by learning, accomplishing a goal, and overall team and personal success. Contingent workers need to be focused on achievement. Otherwise, why are they there? Because ultimately, you're hiring them for a specific reason. So this might change a little bit of the conversation around culture, and we've gotten a little bit into making employees happy, and I'm not sure that's the right conversation. I think we need to be pulling the conversation back to how do we make sure people are working on things that are meaningful and that they understand how it aligns to the macro goals of the organization, and then when they hit their goal, when they do have an achievement, we celebrate that. Manager is the constant. In this new world, there will be talent coming in and out of organizations, as we've been talking about, very quickly. But I'm not sure we're at the full holacracy stage yet. And so my proposal, my theory is that the manager is ultimately going to be your constant. The manager is where your investment should be. And why is that? Ultimately, more and more accountability and responsibility for results is going to lie on their shoulders. Ultimately, they have to go acquire their team. And now there are marketplaces where they can go and directly acquire people for particular projects or needs. And you'll never have to go through recruiting. Now, of course, I still think there's a place for traditional recruiting practices. But if I'm a manager, and again, I need something to happen quickly, maybe I have to go to Upwork to find someone. But what it does mean for companies and what it does mean for HR is they need to help train these managers more efficiently to manage the fluid workforce. Because no longer is there in the traditional kind of forming, storming, norming, performing, there's really no more norming, but you still have to get to performing. So how do you integrate a team, get what you need from everyone that you're working with? We have to train managers better to solve for this. And part of what they will need is more accessibility to tools. And I think we'll see a kind of convergence between HR tools and manager tools. I think that managers will need more and more the types of information that HR has traditionally been the ones to hold, and that includes regular performance data. I think managers need a regular heads-up display as to what their teams are working on and how they're progressing on their goals, how people feel about each other, how people feel about the organization. Typically, this has been HR-driven territory. And I think the beauty of this is if managers have these tools, HR can kind of step away from some of the administrative work that they do to pull all this data together and actually start to be more and more of a business partner. Because ultimately, there's a lot of noise in the data that's out there right now. And the solutions that are out there do not necessarily help us solve for what is really the problem versus just giving us a lot of data that we have to go and manage through. The true value of the next decade will come from systems that not only make it easier to register that there's a performance issue, but also from coaching platforms, systems that analyze patterns and tell you why there's a performance issue and then what to do about it. And this is where I also see HR becoming more and more of that true coach, that true partner, is helping managers analyze these patterns, helping managers, fix problems on their teams before they're real issues, be more integrated into the teams, help disseminate all that noise and focus on the signal, because data is a huge value add in this world. We all know that. But we're getting so much data that it's hard to sometimes really know what the insights are, the true insights. So how do we really manage this future? Well, the conversation really has to shift to talking about productivity. We've talked about culture that drives engagement. We've talked about cultures that make people happy. But right now, we really need to solve for the strategy execution gap. We need to solve for productivity within teams that might not be together for very long. And Josh Bersin at Deloitte, put this out there a few months ago, and I think it hits the nail on the head. We are in a fourth phase, one that demands technology designed around teams, individuals, and networks, tools that implement agile talent practices, and also help people be more productive. It is about productivity and engagement is about achievement. And these separate apps that are in existence right now are making it harder. HR tech right now is an incredibly fragmented space. If you go to an HR tech conference, you'll be overwhelmed. There are specific apps for all of these circles and more. And ultimately, to run an effective team, to run an effective organization, I need something that fits in all of these circles. But this disconnected approach really makes it difficult, especially if we're focusing now on the manager and giving more and more insights and tools to the manager. HR ultimately in this world is just collecting data and trying to put together insights and is like an administrator and can't be as valuable. Plus, the data might not actually talk to each other, so it might not even be the most accurate. But I'm also going to say that alignment, I kind of mentioned it a few slides back, but alignment is the foundation of ensuring that teams can be successful. So you have a manager, you've brought in some talent. How are you going to get that talent to ultimately win the day? First and foremost, you have to set the expectations. Can you blame someone for not performing if you haven't told them the plan or what's expected of them? And, you know, as we've been saying too, people want to know. They want to know what their work is doing to help impact the long-term result. That's how people are motivated. That's how people learn. So where is the plan of record? Setting that expectation up front is how you ensure that employees and freelancers are working towards the same goals and that they are ultimately accountable for what they can do. And then always on feedback. We need to replace these disparate apps. We need to think more and more about being agile as we think about, you know, goals and feedback. We need to collect regular insights and data, 360 insights from everybody around us. And this will ultimately help us marry the traditional and gig economy, because we're going to have to work within all of these constructs, teams versus agencies, departments versus marketplaces. All of these are going to be part of our dialogue going forward. And we need to plan, engage, and perform across both the traditional and the contingent workforces. And we do that by stitching it all together. We need a central nervous system versus these disparate apps. We need to think like an owner, embrace a broader definition of what the workforce is, break down internal barriers to adoption, and build this central nervous system. Give the connectivity to managers, HR, executives, employees, contingent workforce. Everyone needs to have some visibility into these things. The workforce is melting. We will need to evolve. And how can we better connect and accelerate this future? Holding on to existing talent acquisition, talent management, and development practices just won't work. So let's lead this. Or we could be the penguin at that top of the iceberg, just noticing it's melting when it's already too late. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for an excellent presentation. At this time, we would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. As a reminder, please type your questions into the Q&A box, which is located in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Kevin Arndt with Move Guides will be assisting with our Q&A today. So Kevin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Allison, and thanks, Jennifer. Great presentation. We do have a number of questions, so we'll just try to go through as many of these as we can. And the first one, Jennifer, is more kind of a level set. So can you please better define or elaborate on the definition of the gig economy?
Yes, no, that's a great definition, or a great question, sorry. Yeah, so the gig economy is a makeup of freelancers, is a makeup of all contingent workforce. So people that are looking to work on a project basis, temporary basis, part-time basis. I think anyone who's outside the traditional employment construct. So that's how I would say there's kind of the traditional employment relationship. And then I think we're talking about the gig economy, and I know some freelancers don't like to be bucketed into that, but for the purposes of this presentation, the gig economy is anyone who is more or less self-employed or through an agency or kind of a non-traditional employment relationship.
Gotcha, gotcha. Thank you. And you use a lot of examples in the tech industry, which is certainly understandable, but the question is, are you seeing those trends across industries, or is it more specifically around tech?
No, actually, I was doing some research, and I did focus this on tech, but in fact, a lot of this is coming in some of the more industrial industries, medical industries. This really is across a lot of major non-tech industries as well. And because it's global too, I think that, we can certainly, see that this is probably also pervasive across various different types of labor markets.
Great, thank you. There's a couple questions here I'm going to try to combine, but basically I think the question is coming across with all the emphasis these days on employee engagement and company culture, and based on what you're saying with this rise of basically these fluid workers, is all that effort really wasted? If people are going to leave after a short time anyway, what's the point of trying to enable all this culture and engagement, again, if they're essentially all going to be short timers?
No, and I think that's a fantastic question. I don't think trying to drive, a particular culture, insert your definition for your particular company, is necessarily going away, but I do think it gets reframed a little bit, and I do think that expectations need to be reframed a little bit. I think that all companies, it's still important to define what type of organization you want to be. Often companies do this through their kind of mission, vision, values, and that ultimately should still be the anchor. But I think the biggest factor that probably ends up shifting a little bit is that allowing managers to almost create microcultures within their teams, because ultimately they are going to be the ones kind of seeing certain talent in and out of the company, and they can do things to create culture within, kind of in a more intimate setting. That doesn't maybe go against the company's ideals and culture, but is certainly more intimate and more tangible to the people that do come into the organization. So this may mean that, maybe you're able to still have team lunches, but maybe some of the traditional methods that companies have done to date aren't necessarily the right ones anymore. I think we need to promote more virtual interaction. Whether this person is there for a week or a year, we need to have systems, from video calls to Slack are great ones already, but maybe start to infuse some small traditions around introducing oneself. Buddy systems are still relevant. but really focusing on, again, that element of achievement. I think if you have people coming in and out, focusing on what they're doing, how they're doing it, and are they successful, and then recognizing that are still great ways to promote a positive working environment. And ultimately, that is what people are looking for. I think we've gone a little too far the other direction, you know, with a lot of different perks. And ultimately, you know, people don't stay for the free lunches. People stay because they're learning something new and doing cool work, and they have great people that, you know, are generally working with them, and it's a positive work environment. I don't think that changes, but I think how we think about culture overall probably does need to shift a little bit.
Great, great. It all comes down to, you know, you like your manager and you like the guy next to you, it's all good, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of that there, yeah.
A couple more questions here, and I'm going to try to combine a couple of these. These are near and dear to my heart because they hit on what Move Guides does. So basically, the question is, based on the growth of freelancers or / the gig economy, what effect will this have on the future of global mobility, employee relocation, all those sort of things?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I actually was at a presentation. It was a mobility conference where I was on a panel there, and someone spoke that they had a project. These were all engineers across the globe who ended up working together. Now, this is a true holacracy project that came out of this, but it was a Hyperloop project, so one of the many Hyperloop projects that are out there. But they were completely global, and they were working together with no management construct. Now, I think that's the very far extreme, but I think we're going to end up finding talent all over the world through this gig economy. I think that moving people and relocating people will still be very important because we are a global economy. We're you know, this world is getting smaller and smaller every day. So I don't think that is necessarily, if anything, I think that probably increases because we do need to continue to find talent that can help us kind of always evolve to that next wave of innovation, and that might not be in our own backyard. And we might have to send managers that we've trained over to other countries to help build teams over there. So I think that it doesn't necessarily at all take away from the fact that we are a global community, and you know, we will always have to solve for what's best, you know, in each region or across the world.
Thank you. How about this one? How do we manage labor laws with this new model?
Labor laws are definitely, I mean, I think we all know some are still very antiquated and haven't caught up with kind of the way things actually work. I do think that it will be hard at first, especially in certain states that have even more strict labor laws. But there are definitely ways to solve for that. So a lot of people working within agencies, a lot of true freelancers that are working within Upwork and things right now, a lot of them have 4 to 5 different projects at any given point in time. So they really do kind of fall under the kind of IRS definition of an independent contractor. So as long as we, you know, I think that's why some of the feedback loops and the ratings and things, how that's done is also important. It's not a traditional performance review, you know, as kind of, you know, you're not going to be treating them like an employee. I think there are different ways to solve for some of those kind of labor law issues. I think the marketplaces have helped us create opportunities for this evolution. You know, we kind of already give feedback to our independent contractors that work with us. So I think this is, you know, they are a little antiquated, but I think that there is room to start pushing a little bit on it here.
Thanks. Again, back to more of a engagement kind of culture question. So are you seeing more organizations bringing in virtual new hires when applicable? And if so, how can you maintain engagement with these virtual employees?
So I am seeing it at several organizations. One company I work with right now, you know, they don't really care necessarily where you live. And engagement, again, I think you have to find the appropriate balance of, you know, human connection, maybe utilized through technology, because even though technology has helped us get away from human connection in some respects, it has helped, you know, get platforms to really reach out to people that are not sitting next to us. And actually, most of the companies that I work with, you know, they do understand this change. And even though it's much easier to have someone sitting next to you, maybe, you know, you have to kind of push the boundaries and hire people more remotely. And so I think, again, this is where alignment is really important, where the manager is really important, because they're the ones to help kind of bind everyone together. And this is where I think, you know, systems really can help. You know, they can help create virtual connections between people. Just for example, actually my own company, so I have a software company, we run our entire company on our platform. You know, my engineering team is up in outside Toronto. My customer service team's in Edmonton, Canada. You know, I'm based in the Bay Area. So we're an entirely virtual team, and we still are very connected. We use the tools that are available to us every day. And I've never actually met my lead engineer in person, and yet I feel like I know him, you know, very personally. So I think that, you know, there are ways to do it, but it does take effort. I like to use the analogy, like if you go to the gym once a year, you know, it hurts a lot. If you go to the gym every day, it becomes a lot easier. So you have to put in that effort every day to actually connect with people.
So there's always work involved, Jen. Is that it?
Yes, can't get away from it all.
Here's another question. Could you please elaborate on the always-on feedback point you made? How do you implement? Is that regular engagement surveys? Is there other ways to do it?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to go back to that gym metaphor I just made. So if you kind of take that premise, you know, if you go once a year, it's a really painful experience. You kind of dread it all the way up until the day of. But if you go every day, there's no fear in it. And the same thing is with feedback and implementing always-on feedback. It might be painful at first, but it gets a lot easier. And you have to train your managers on their role in delivering and collecting feedback. Train them that every one-on-one, there should be some element of this reciprocation. There are systems out there to help support this practice, which includes aligning and setting expectations, getting 360 feedback from peers, getting feedback from every contingent worker, manager, company. And again, I think that HR, this is where the role can really start to continue to evolve to be more strategic and to be more of a coach and help managers through this process. It's just like being a trainer at the gym. You know, like once you get your managers kind of used to this, you'll find that they even, you know, are training others, and that they find it to actually be easier than the once-a-year approach.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions here. If salary and benefits don't encourage loyalty, what would?
Well, I think that this is, it's a weird time right now because I'm not sure. I mean, I think the things that drive people's interests are the same whether you're a contingent worker or a full-time person, full-time employment relationship. I think that employees want learning, they want fast growth, they want great work to be working on, they want to make an impact. All of these things are true, I think, in both worlds. Now, I think you could create more interest in loyalty or staying with an organization if you're able to check all those boxes plus have great management. And so that might, leverage people's interest to stay at a particular company longer. But I think, brutally, I think this concept of loyalty is different than it once was. I think that, most people want to be at a great company, but they also view it oftentimes as a job, and that they'll go find another job when this one, isn't quite meeting their needs. And it's pretty brutal because it's, companies invest a lot of time and effort and money into people. And people have high expectations now of what they want of their organizations. But I still think it's anchored in those particular values. If companies can double down in training and development, double down in bringing people into the fold, into understanding, what the goals of the company are, what the goals of the team are, and therefore how their goals impact everything, what they're doing impacts the greater good. And obviously there's great managers and a little bit of flexibility. I think that, people would stay longer at organizations, but it is a very competitive environment out there, and people are looking for always the next best thing. It is hard.
Yeah, great advice there. So I think this is going to be our last question, it looks like, and I think this is a great one to end on because it's kind of the meta question to me. So, Jen, is the rise of the gig economy a good thing or a bad thing, or does it not matter because it's happening anyway?
Well, that is a meta question, isn't it? I think, honestly, from my perspective, I actually think it's a great thing. I think it's going to bring more and more innovation, more and more opportunities for people. It will be a shift in thinking, and I do think it's happening anyway. But so we all should generally be prepared. But I actually think, again, 55% of freelancers will learn a new skill in the last 6 months. How many of us can say we've done the same? I think that, we're becoming more curious. We're becoming more interested in a plethora of different things, and we want to diversify our skill sets and put ourselves out there. And I think that only brings more innovation and more opportunity for all of us going forward.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing your insights, and Kevin, thank you for assisting with our Q&A today. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Move Guides for sponsoring today's webinar. You all have been a wonderful audience, and I hope you have enjoyed today's program. Watch your emails for a copy of today's presentation. It will come to you from messenger@webex.com. Have a great afternoon. You may all now disconnect.